She worked in a place where everything looked perfect from the outside. The floors always shined, the tables were always arranged with care, and the guests who walked in always looked like they belonged to a different world. Expensive suits, elegant dresses, soft laughter, and the sound of clinking glasses filled the air almost every evening. It was the kind of place where people came to be seen, to celebrate success, or to talk about deals that could change their lives. And she was part of that world only as a quiet worker behind it all. Every day started early for her. She would arrive before the first guests came in, change into her simple uniform, tie her hair neatly, and prepare herself for long hours of standing, walking, and serving. Her job was not difficult in skill, but it was demanding in patience. She had to smile even when she was tired, move quickly even when her feet hurt, and stay polite even when some guests barely looked at her as a person. Most people never remembered her face. To them, she was just another waitress in a busy luxury hotel. Someone who came and went like part of the background. Plates, orders, cleaning, serving drinks, repeating the same routine over and over again. That was her life on the surface. But inside her, there was something different. There was a quiet world she carried with her. A world that no one in that hotel knew about. She had once been someone who spent hours sitting in front of a piano. Not in a place like the hotel lobby, but in a much simpler setting, where life was not about luxury or appearance. When she was younger, she had learned music with passion. The piano was not just an instrument to her. It was a place where she felt understood without speaking. When she pressed the keys, it felt like she could express emotions she could not explain in words. But life does not always follow the path people imagine. As time passed, responsibilities grew. Her family faced difficulties and priorities changed. The piano slowly disappeared from her daily life. First it became less important, then it became rare, and eventually it became something she only remembered, not something she touched. She did not stop loving it. She simply stopped having the chance to continue. Still, the memory of music never left her. Even while working in the hotel, there were moments when she would pause for a second if she heard soft background music playing in the dining hall. Her eyes would slightly shift toward the source, as if something inside her recognized a language she had not spoken in a long time. But she would quickly return to her work, reminding herself that she was here for a reason, and dreams had to be set aside for now. The hotel itself was known for hosting guests who came from wealthy backgrounds. Businessmen, high-profile families, and important visitors often reserved private events there. On such nights, the atmosphere would become even more formal than usual. Extra staff would be called in, tables would be arranged with precision, and every detail would be checked multiple times to ensure nothing was out of place. She always worked on those nights too. She never complained. In fact, she had become known among the staff for being reliable and calm, even during stressful hours. While others rushed or got frustrated, she stayed focused on doing her job properly. But deep inside, those nights also reminded her of how far she felt from the life she once imagined. One evening, something unusual caught her attention. The hotel lobby had a grand piano placed near the center. It was large, polished, and clearly expensive. Most of the time, it was not used. It stood there more as decoration, a symbol of elegance rather than an instrument meant for daily play. Sometimes hired musicians would perform during special events, but most guests simply passed by without paying attention to it. That evening, while moving between tables, she slowed down near it. It was not intentional at first. It was just a brief glance. But something about it held her there longer than expected. The shine of the polished wood, the perfectly aligned keys, and the silence around it created a strange pull. It was as if a forgotten part of her memory had suddenly been awakened just by seeing it. She stood there for a moment, holding a tray, watching the piano as guests passed behind her. No one noticed her pause except one or two guests sitting nearby. To them, she was just a waitress standing near a decorative object. But to her, it was something else entirely. It was a reminder of a version of herself she had almost stopped thinking about. She quickly moved away when she realized she had been standing too long. Her shift was still going on, and she had work to do. But even after she walked away, the image of the piano stayed in her mind. Later that night, while cleaning a table near the lobby, she heard a few guests talking. A private event was being prepared for the next evening. Important people would be arriving. Everything had to be perfect. There was mention of live entertainment, though nothing specific was confirmed yet. She did not think much of it at first. But the next day, the atmosphere in the hotel felt different. Staff were more alert than usual. Decorations were being adjusted. Security was slightly increased. It was clear that something significant was about to take place. And then she saw it again. The piano in the lobby was being cleaned and adjusted. This time it was not just sitting silently. Chairs were being arranged around the area. Lights were being tested. It looked like it might actually be used that night. She continued her work, but her attention kept returning to it without her permission. Every time she passed nearby, she felt a strange mix of curiosity and nervousness. Not because she wanted attention, but because something inside her felt unsettled, as if a door she had closed long ago was quietly shaking open again. She tried to ignore it. She told herself it had nothing to do with her. She was just a waitress. That world belonged to performers, not staff like her. But deep inside, a small voice she had not heard in years was starting to grow louder. And she did not yet know that by the end of the night, everything around her would begin to change in a way she could never have expected. By the next evening, the hotel looked completely different from its usual calm routine. Everything felt more intense, more polished, and more controlled. The entrance was filled with luxury cars arriving one after another. People in expensive suits and elegant dresses walked in with confidence, as if the place belonged to them more than anyone else. The air itself felt heavier, like everyone inside was playing a role in something important. She arrived earlier than usual that day. Her uniform was already ironed perfectly. Her hair was tied neatly, and she had made sure every detail of her appearance matched the strict standards of the hotel. But even with everything in place on the outside, her mind was not fully steady. Something about that night felt different, though she could not explain why. She did her usual tasks at the start of the shift. She checked tables, helped arrange glasses, and assisted in preparing the hall for the evening guests. But every few minutes, her eyes drifted toward the lobby area where the piano stood. It was no longer just a decorative piece. Chairs were placed around it in a semicircle. Soft lighting had been arranged above it, giving it a quiet spotlight. It was clear now. The piano would be used that night. She tried to focus on her work, but her attention kept slipping back. Each time she passed near the lobby, she felt something tighten inside her chest. It was not fear exactly. It was something closer to memory. A feeling she had buried long ago, now slowly rising without permission. Other staff were busy too, but no one paid attention to her thoughts. To them, she was simply doing her job like always. Calm, quiet, and efficient. But inside, she was struggling to keep her mind steady. As the evening continued, more guests arrived. The hall began to fill with voices, soft laughter, and the sound of glasses being placed on tables. Private event was clearly underway. It was one of those nights where everything had to run perfectly, with no mistakes allowed. She was assigned to serve one of the main sections near the center of the hall. It meant she would be close to the stage area, close enough to see everything clearly, including the piano. When she first walked into her assigned section, she noticed something that made her slow down for a second. The seating arrangement had been designed so that almost every important guest would have a clear view of the piano. It was not just background decoration anymore. It was the center of attention for the evening. Still, she told herself it had nothing to do with her. She picked up her tray and began serving drinks. Her movements were smooth and practiced. She moved between tables carefully, making sure not to disturb conversations. Some guests barely acknowledged her presence. Others gave polite nods without really seeing her. That was normal for her. She had learned long ago not to take it personally. But even while working, she could feel the piano pulling her attention like a quiet sound in the background that refused to disappear. Then came the moment that changed the atmosphere slightly. A small group of high-profile guests arrived late. Their entrance caused a subtle shift in the room. Conversations paused for a few seconds as people noticed them. There was a sense of importance around them, the kind that made others sit up a little straighter. They were guided to a central table with a direct view of the piano. She happened to be nearby when they sat down. As she placed drinks on their table, she overheard bits of their conversation. They were talking about entertainment for the night. Someone mentioned that a live piano performance might take place. Another voice sounded slightly amused, as if expecting something ordinary and forgettable. She kept her expression neutral and moved away quickly. But that short moment stayed with her. The idea that a performance would happen there, in front of all these people, made the atmosphere feel even more serious. It was no longer just a hotel event. It was turning into a stage. As time passed, the hall grew quieter in a different way. Not silent, but focused. People were settling in, waiting for the main part of the evening. Even the staff moved more carefully now. She found herself standing near the edge of the lobby again during a short break. The piano was fully ready now. The lights above it gave it a soft glow. It looked almost unreal, like something waiting for a moment to come alive. She stood there longer than she should have. Her thoughts drifted further than before. She remembered sitting at a piano years ago. Not in a place like this, but in a much simpler room. Back then, she did not think about audiences or expectations. She simply played because it made her feel alive. Her fingers had once known the keys like a language. She slowly moved her hand slightly, as if remembering without meaning to. Then she quickly pulled it back, as if realizing where she was. This was not her world anymore. She turned away and went back to her duties. But something had already started inside her that could not be easily stopped. Later, the event officially began its main segment. The lights in the hall dimmed slightly, focusing attention toward the front. Conversations became softer. Glasses were placed down more slowly. Everyone seemed to understand that something was about to happen. She was instructed to stay near the side of the hall to assist if needed. From where she stood, she had a clear view of the piano. And then it happened. A few guests applauded politely as someone approached the piano area. It was not yet clear who would perform, but the expectation in the room was obvious. The atmosphere shifted again, becoming more focused and quiet. She stood still, holding a tray she no longer needed to use for the moment. Her heart beat slightly faster, though she did not understand why. Then she saw movement near the piano. People were stepping aside to make space. The lighting adjusted slightly, becoming more centered on the instrument. The room was now fully watching. She did not realize it at first, but she had started moving a little closer without thinking. Not intentionally, just slowly, as if something was guiding her steps. Her mind told her to stop, to stay where she was, to remain invisible as she always had. But her body did not fully listen. The piano was now fully in focus. And in that moment, everything felt like it was waiting for something unknown to begin. The room had slowly changed without most people even noticing how it happened. At first, it was just another elegant evening inside a luxury hotel hall. People were talking, drinking, smiling, and enjoying themselves in their own circles. But now something had shifted in the air. The conversations were softer, the movements slower, and almost every eye in the room was slowly turning toward the same place. The piano. She stood near the side of the hall, still holding the tray in her hands, though there was nothing left on it. Her shift had not ended, but for a few moments, she was not moving like she normally did. Her attention was fixed ahead, even though she tried to act like she was still focused on her work. That was how she had always survived in places like this, by staying unnoticed. But tonight, staying unnoticed was becoming harder. A group of guests had taken their seats closer to the center. Their clothing, their posture, and the way they spoke made it clear they were important people. Not just wealthy, but powerful in the way that made others adjust their behavior around them. When they entered earlier, the room had changed its rhythm slightly, as if everyone had agreed without speaking to become more careful. Now they were sitting directly in front of the piano area. She had noticed them before while serving. They had been laughing quietly, talking with confidence, and occasionally glancing around as if evaluating the room. At one point, she had passed their table, and she remembered one of them making a small comment about the evening's entertainment. It was said casually, almost as a joke, but there had been a tone in it that stayed in her mind longer than it should have. Now, that same group was watching the piano space with expectation. The lights in the hall dimmed slightly more. A soft spotlight above the piano became brighter. The reflection on the polished surface of the instrument made it stand out even more. It no longer looked like decoration. It looked like a stage waiting for someone to claim it. She felt something tighten in her chest again. It was not fear exactly. It was something more complicated. A feeling she had not experienced in a long time. A mixture of memory, uncertainty, and something she did not want to name. She adjusted her grip on the tray without thinking, even though it was already empty. Her body had grown used to small movements like that when she felt nervous. It helped her stay in control. But control was becoming difficult. The room grew quieter. Conversations faded. Even the sound of glasses touching tables became less frequent. It was as if everyone had agreed, silently, that the main moment of the evening was about to begin. She looked at the piano again. And this time she did not look away immediately. Felt different now. Earlier it had just been an object in the room. Something elegant, something distant. But now, under the spotlight, it felt alive. Waiting. Watching. Almost calling attention without sound. She swallowed slightly and forced herself to step back toward her usual position. She told herself she was just a waitress. Nothing more. She was there to serve, to move quietly, to do her job and leave without being noticed. That had always been enough. But tonight, something inside her was not fully listening. The seating area in front of the piano was now completely filled. The most important guests were sitting there, their attention fixed forward. Even those who had been casually relaxed earlier were now sitting in a more focused posture. There was an unspoken expectation in the air. Someone was about to perform. She had heard earlier that live music might be part of the evening. It was not unusual for this kind of event. Sometimes pianists were invited to play soft background pieces during dinners or formal gatherings. It was meant to create atmosphere, not attention. But tonight felt different. This did not feel like background music. It felt like a moment everyone was waiting for. She stepped slightly to the side, closer to the wall, trying to stay out of the main sightline. From there, she could see everything clearly without being directly in the center. That was always her safe place. Close enough to observe, far enough to disappear. A staff member near the piano adjusted something on a small table beside it. Another checked the lighting again. There was preparation happening now, but still no performer visible. The guests began to shift slightly in their seats. A soft murmur passed through the room. It was not loud, but it carried curiosity. People were beginning to wonder who would sit at the piano. Some leaned slightly forward. Others stopped talking completely. She noticed something then. A few of the high society guests, those who had arrived earlier with confidence and ease, were now exchanging small looks. Not nervous, but curious in a way that suggested they were waiting for something unexpected. One of them gave a slight smile, as if anticipating a performance that might impress or entertain. She felt a strange discomfort at that expression. It was not directed at her. It was not personal, but something about the atmosphere made her uneasy. It felt like people were waiting not just for music, but for a display. A moment to judge, to evaluate, to decide what was worth their attention. She lowered her gaze for a second and then looked back up. The piano was still empty. The silence in the room grew heavier. Even the background noise from the kitchen and service areas seemed distant now, like it belonged to another world. Then came a small sound. Not music, just the soft movement of a chair being adjusted somewhere near the piano area. That small sound changed everything. People straightened slightly. Eyes sharpened. Attention became fully focused. The room was no longer just waiting casually. It was now fully present in the moment. She felt her heartbeat change pace slightly. She told herself again that she had nothing to do with this. She was only here to work, to serve, to stay invisible. But her eyes stayed fixed forward. The spotlight above the piano grew slightly brighter. And then she saw movement near the edge of the piano area. Someone was approaching. Not rushing. Not dramatic. Just steady, calm movement. A few guests adjusted their posture again. The anticipation in the room reached a quiet peak. She could not see clearly who it was yet. Only the silhouette moving closer to the instrument. A soft hush spread across the room. Even the guests who had been laughing earlier were now silent. The figure paused for a moment near the piano. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath without realizing it. And she stood there, still near the wall, watching the same moment as everyone else, not yet knowing that what was about to happen would change the way this room remembered the night forever. The silence in the hall had become so deep that even the smallest sound felt important. No one was speaking now. No one was laughing or moving around freely like before. It was as if the entire room had agreed without words to pause everything and focus on the same point. The piano. She stood near the side wall, slightly behind a tall decorative pillar, holding her position like she always did when things became too intense around her. It was a habit she had developed over time, finding places where she could see without being fully seen. It made her feel safe in environments where attention could easily become uncomfortable. But tonight, even that small sense of safety felt uncertain. The figure who had approached the piano was still not fully clear to her. The lighting made it difficult to see details, but the movement was calm and steady. There was no hesitation in the steps. That alone made people in the room pay even more attention. The guests in the front row leaned forward slightly. Some of them exchanged brief glances, as if trying to guess what kind of performance was about to begin. Others simply stared ahead, waiting without expression. The earlier casual mood had completely disappeared. Everything now felt serious, even though no one had said anything out loud. She tightened her grip on her hands without realizing it. The tray she was holding was now just a formality. There was nothing left to serve, yet she kept holding it because it gave her something to focus on. Something normal. Something that reminded her she still had a role in this space. The piano area became even brighter as the spotlight adjusted slightly. And then, slowly, the figure moved closer to the bench. A soft sound came from the movement of shoes against the floor. It was small, but in the quiet room it was noticeable. A few guests shifted again in response. The anticipation was now fully formed. It was no longer curiosity. It was expectation. She felt a strange pressure in her chest again. Not fear exactly. Something more like memory mixed with uncertainty. She told herself again that she should not be paying so much attention. Her job was elsewhere. She should be moving, checking tables, making sure everything was in order. But her feet did not move. Her eyes did not turn away. The figure finally stopped in front of the piano bench. For a brief moment, nothing happened. That moment felt longer than it really was. Time seemed to stretch inside the silence. Even the air felt heavier, like everyone in the room was holding their breath together. Then the figure slowly turned and sat down. A soft shift of the bench was heard. That small sound triggered a subtle reaction across the room. Some guests adjusted their posture again. Others tilted their heads slightly, focusing more closely. The performance had officially begun, even though no music had started yet. She felt her stomach tighten slightly. Now there was no turning away from it. The figure placed both hands near the keys but did not play immediately. There was a pause again. Another silence, but this one felt different. It was not empty. It was filled with intention. She could feel her heartbeat becoming more noticeable. The room was completely still now. Even the staff who were standing near the edges were not moving. Everyone was waiting for the first note. She looked at the piano again. It was strange how something so still could create so much tension. The instrument itself did nothing, yet it controlled the entire room. Everyone was focused on it as if it held answers to something important. The hands finally moved. The first note was played. It was soft, almost gentle, barely more than a whisper in sound. But in the silence of the room, it felt clear and sharp. It carried through the hall in a way that immediately changed the atmosphere. A few guests blinked slightly, adjusting to the sound. Then another note followed. And another. Slowly, a pattern began to form. She felt something shift inside her as she listened. The sound was not loud, but it was precise. Each note felt placed carefully, as if it had been thought about deeply before being played. She noticed that her own breathing had slowed without her realizing it. The music was not fast or dramatic. It was steady, controlled, but there was something emotional inside it that was difficult to ignore. It was not just sound. It felt like expression. The guests in the front row were now fully focused. Some leaned back slightly, as if adjusting to the mood. Others remained forward, absorbed in what was happening. She saw one guest who had earlier been smiling casually now sitting completely still, eyes fixed on the piano. The music continued. It slowly grew in complexity, but never lost its calm tone. It was like watching something unfold carefully, layer by layer. Not rushed, not forced, just natural progression. She felt her attention becoming more and more drawn toward it. She tried to resist it. She told herself again that she should focus on her work, that she was only there to serve, not to watch. But the sound made it difficult to think about anything else. Her eyes stayed on the piano. The figure's hands moved smoothly across the keys. There was confidence in the movement, but also something else. Something softer, something emotional that could not be explained easily. The hall remained silent. No one spoke. No one interrupted. Even the sound of glasses or movement from the kitchen seemed distant now, almost disconnected from this moment. It felt like the entire room had narrowed down to one point. She felt a strange pull inside her chest again. It was not just curiosity anymore. It was recognition. But she did not fully understand what she was recognizing. The music shifted slightly in tone. It became deeper for a moment, carrying a feeling that made the atmosphere heavier. A few guests subtly changed their expressions. Not discomfort but surprise, as if they were not expecting something so emotionally layered. She noticed her fingers tightening slightly around the tray again. The music continued to grow, still controlled, still precise, but now with more feeling behind it. It was as if the piano was speaking something without words. She found herself holding her breath without realizing it. The figure at the piano remained steady. No dramatic movements. No unnecessary gestures. Just focused playing. And in that simplicity, something powerful was forming. The room, which had started the evening filled with luxury and casual confidence, now felt completely different. It was quiet in a way that was not normal for such a gathering. It was not awkward silence. It was attention. Pure attention. She had seen many performances before in the hotel. Musicians often played for guests. Some were skilled, some were average. But this felt different in a way she could not explain easily. It was not about volume or speed. It was about feeling. The music reached a slightly stronger moment, then softened again, like waves moving gently back and forth. She felt something unfamiliar in her thoughts. A memory she had not touched in a long time was slowly starting to surface, but she pushed it back without fully understanding why. Her focus returned to the piano. The notes continued, and the entire room remained completely silent, waiting to see where the performance would go next. The room was no longer just a hotel hall filled with guests. It had become something else entirely. The soft lighting, the polished tables, the quiet glasses, and the perfectly dressed people all seemed to fade into the background. Everything now existed only around the piano. The sound coming from it had changed the atmosphere completely. She stood near the side wall, still holding the empty tray in her hands, though she was no longer aware of it. Her attention was fully locked forward. She did not even notice how long she had been standing still. The idea of moving felt distant, almost unnecessary, as if the world had temporarily narrowed down to only one thing. The music continued. It was not loud. It was not dramatic in a way that demanded attention. But it had something deeper in it. Something that made people stop thinking about their surroundings and simply listen. The notes flowed one after another, smooth and controlled, like they were part of a conversation that only the piano could speak. In the front rows, the guests who had arrived with confidence earlier now sat in complete silence. Some had their hands resting still on the table. Others leaned slightly forward, not speaking, not reacting, just listening. Even the ones who usually seemed distracted or impatient were now fully focused. There was no more casual laughter. No side conversations. No movement except for small, natural adjustments in posture. Everything had changed. She noticed this without trying to notice it. Her eyes simply saw it all at once. The same people who had walked in earlier with a sense of importance now looked completely still, as if the music had taken away their need to perform or impress. The piano continued. The figure playing it remained steady, sitting upright with calm focus. The hands moved with confidence, but also with something more subtle underneath. It was not just technical skill. It felt like emotion being translated into sound. She could not explain why, but her chest felt slightly tight again. The music shifted gently into a softer passage. The tone became lighter for a moment, almost fragile, like a memory being carefully touched without breaking it. Then it grew again, slowly building into something richer. It was like watching waves move across water. Calm, then deep, then calm again. She found herself swallowing slightly, though her throat was not dry. It was just a reaction she could not control. A guest near the center table leaned back in their chair, eyes still fixed on the piano. Another person, who had earlier been speaking confidently about business and plans, now sat completely silent, hands folded in front of them. No one seemed interested in talking anymore. The room had agreed on silence without a single word being spoken. She tried to stay aware of her job. She reminded herself that she should move, check tables, assist if needed. That was her role. That was what she always did. But her feet did not move. It was as if the music had made everything else slower, including her own thoughts. The piano sound grew slightly stronger again. Not loud, but more present. More filled with emotion. She noticed something strange then. It was not just that the guests were listening. It was how they were listening. Some looked surprised. Some looked thoughtful. And a few simply looked still, as if they were trying to understand something they had not expected. The music was not just being heard. It was being felt. She felt a small shift inside her chest again. This time it was different. Not just tension, but something closer to recognition. The sound was doing something to her memory. It was pulling at something she had buried for a long time, something she had avoided thinking about for years. She did not fully understand it yet, but it made her focus sharpen even more. The piano continued. The melody moved into a deeper section again, carrying a sense of weight and emotion that made the atmosphere feel even more intense. It was not sadness exactly. It was more like reflection. Something that made people think without asking them to. She noticed one of the guests lower their gaze slightly, as if caught in thought. Another gently touched their glass but did not drink from it. Everything was paused except the music. She slowly shifted her weight from one foot to another, still standing near the wall. Her tray was still in her hands, but she had completely forgotten why she was holding it. The sound filled the entire hall now. Even the far corners of the room seemed to be touched by it. It was not just the piano area anymore. The entire space felt connected to the performance. She had heard music before in the hotel. Sometimes it was soft background piano during dinners. Sometimes it was live performances for special events. But nothing had ever felt like this. This was different. It was not entertainment. Felt like expression. The melody changed again. It became slightly faster for a few seconds, then slowed down again like a breath being taken and released carefully. The control in the performance was clear. Every note felt intentional, not random. She found herself focusing on the hands moving across the keys. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just steady movement, as if the music was already known before it was played. Her mind tried again to pull her back to reality. She reminded herself that she was just a waitress in a hotel, that she should not be standing still like this, that she should be working, moving, doing her job properly. But something inside her was no longer fully listening to that logic. The music kept pulling her attention back. The hall remained completely silent. Even the sound of footsteps from staff in the distance had become less noticeable. It felt like the entire building had slowed down. She noticed a small detail then. A few guests were no longer looking at each other. They were all looking forward. Not distracted. Not wandering. Just focused. It was rare to see that kind of attention in a place like this. The piano played on. The tones softened again. This part of the music felt different. More delicate. Almost like it was telling a story without words. A story that did not need explanation but still made people feel something deep inside. She felt a strange heaviness in her chest again. It was not discomfort. It was something closer to emotion she could not fully name. Her fingers tightened slightly around the tray again without her realizing it. She took a small breath and held it for a moment. The music continued flowing. And now something else was happening in the room. The silence was no longer just silence. It had become attention. Pure attention. No one was bored. No one was distracted. No one was checking their phones or looking around anymore. Everyone was present in the moment in a way that felt almost unusual for such a formal gathering. She noticed a slight change in her own thoughts. For the first time that night, she was not thinking about serving tables or completing tasks. She was only listening, even though she tried not to admit it to herself. The piano reached a slightly stronger moment again, filling the room with a deeper sound that seemed to resonate in the air. Some guests blinked slowly, as if coming out of a thought they did not realize they had entered. Others remained still, absorbing every note. She felt a quiet pressure in her chest again. It was becoming harder to ignore what she was feeling. The music was not just sound anymore. It was presence. And as the performance continued, the entire room stayed completely silent, waiting for what would come next, without realizing that the moment they were experiencing was already something they would not forget easily. The final part of the performance did not feel like an ending at first. It felt more like the music was still speaking, still telling something that had not completely finished. The hall remained silent, but it was not an empty silence. It was full of attention, full of emotion, and full of something that people could not easily explain. She was still standing near the side wall, though she no longer felt like she was standing in a hotel anymore. It felt like she had been placed inside a moment that did not belong to normal time. Her body was still, but her mind was fully locked on the piano. The music continued. It had softened again, becoming slower, more careful. Each note felt like it was being placed with thought, not rushed, not forced. It was as if the performance had reached a point where everything was being expressed with complete honesty. The guests in the front rows remained completely quiet. No one was shifting now. No one was adjusting their seats or looking away. Even the people who had arrived with confidence earlier, who usually filled silence with conversation, were now completely still. Some of them looked surprised. Some looked thoughtful. And a few simply looked changed. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, internal way that could not be seen easily from the outside. She noticed this without meaning to focus on it. Her eyes were still fixed on the piano, but her awareness had expanded to the whole room. The music had created something unusual. It had removed distance between people for a moment. Everyone was experiencing the same silence, the same sound, the same focus. The piano played on. The melody became slightly deeper again, carrying a sense of reflection. It was not heavy in a sad way. It felt more like looking back at something important, something meaningful, something that could not be ignored anymore. She felt that same strange pressure in her chest again. But this time it was stronger. It was not just tension. It was recognition. Something inside her mind was slowly opening. Something she had kept closed for a long time. She could not fully understand it yet, but it was there, rising quietly with every note. The music moved gently into its final passage. It did not rush. It did not suddenly increase in speed or volume. Instead, it slowed down even more, like it was carefully choosing each final sound before letting them go. The room felt even quieter now. Even though it had already been silent, this silence felt deeper, more complete. She noticed a guest near the front slightly close their eyes, as if absorbing the sound more deeply. Another leaned back in their chair, hands resting still, expression calm but thoughtful. No one was speaking. No one was reacting loudly. Everything was internal now. She felt her own breathing slow without realizing it. The piano continued its final movement. The notes were softer now, almost delicate, like they were fading slowly into the air instead of ending sharply. It felt like something was being gently released. She did not know how long she had been standing there. Time felt unclear. The only thing that felt real was the sound. Then the final notes came. They were not sudden, not dramatic, just carefully placed, one after another, until there was a moment where the music seemed to settle completely. And then it stopped. The silence that followed was different from all the silence before it. It was not just quiet. It was complete stillness. No one moved. No one spoke. The entire hall seemed to freeze in place for a few seconds. It was as if everyone needed time to understand that the performance had ended. She felt that too. Her chest rose slightly as she took a breath she did not realize she had been holding. The figure at the piano remained still for a moment after finishing. Hands resting near the keys. No movement. Just silence. Then slowly, the person at the piano moved back slightly and lifted their hands away. The performance was over. Still, no one clapped immediately. That moment of silence after the final note lasted longer than expected. It was not awkward. It was respectful. It was the kind of silence that comes when people are processing something deeper than simple entertainment. She noticed the guests first. Some blinked slowly, as if coming out of a thought. Others looked at the piano as if they were still waiting for more, even though they knew it was finished. A few guests exchanged small looks, not speaking, but clearly affected by what they had just heard. Then, slowly, a few hands began to clap. First, it was soft. One or two people. Then more joined. The sound of applause grew gently, spreading across the hall. It was not loud or rushed. It was steady and respectful. She stayed where she was, still holding the tray. Her eyes remained on the piano. Something inside her felt different now. Not fully understood, but changed. The applause continued. Some guests stood slightly to show appreciation. Others remained seated but clapped with focused attention, as if they were still thinking about what they had just experienced. She noticed that even the people who had earlier seemed confident or distant were now quiet in a different way. Not distracted anymore. Not casual. Something had shifted in their expressions. The piano performance had done something to the room. It had removed distance between people, even if only for a short time. She felt her fingers relax slightly around the tray. For the first time that night, she looked away from the piano. Not because she wanted to escape it, but because she needed a moment to understand herself. Her eyes lowered slightly, and in that small moment, a memory came forward. Not sudden, not overwhelming, just a quiet image from the past. A simpler room, a smaller space, and a piano she had once sat in front of without fear. Her fingers had once moved across keys with confidence. Back then, music was not something far away. It was part of her daily life. It was something that made her feel complete in a way she had not felt in a long time. She slowly blinked. The memory did not disappear, but it no longer felt distant. It felt close. The applause in the hall continued for a few more moments before slowly settling down. The guests began to relax again, some speaking softly to each other, others still looking toward the piano as if unwilling to fully leave the moment behind. The atmosphere had changed completely from how it was at the beginning of the night, but she was still standing there near the wall, slightly apart from everything. The piano area was now just a little less bright, the spotlight still there but no longer the center of attention. The performance had ended, but its effect remained in the room. She finally lowered her hands a little, still holding the tray, though now it felt lighter. The figure at the piano had not left yet. There was a quiet pause, a moment where everything felt calm again, but different from before. The guests slowly returned to their conversations, but their voices were softer than earlier. Something had changed in them too. She took a small step back. Not leaving, just shifting, like she was trying to return to her normal role again. But something inside her did not fully return with her. As she stood there, watching the room slowly come back to life, she realized something quietly. This night had not been like any other night. And even though she did not understand everything yet, she knew one thing clearly. The sound she had just heard was not something she would forget. Not easily. Not ever. And somewhere deep inside, without saying it out loud, she felt that something in her life had already started to change, even if the world around her had not realized it yet.